Hello, movie lovers. Welcome home. My name is Amy Hinserling, and you are listening to Watch This List. This is, oh my gosh, episode 5 of Psychoanalyze This. Okay. Episode 5 with Dr. Ethan Lyon. And we are covering a movie that I thought Ethan really liked, and then I went to his Hitchcock arrangement of his rankings, and this is number 20, Ethan. I thought this was like in your top 5, and it's like way down. So can you please explain yourself?
Or could you explain yourself? You were the one who chose this.
Yes, but I thought that this was one that you loved because it was part of your academia, your experience. I thought, why would he pick something that's number 20 on a ranking?
Okay, that's an interesting one. I see we're already getting down to the hard stuff.
Mm-hmm.
We're getting down to the...
Welcome to the show. Explain yourself.
All right, fine, I will. I saw this for my undergraduate dissertation, which I did about 9 years ago now. And for me, the reason that I didn't choose them originally because I chose this film, and I also chose one of the films which you're going to see as my...
Watch This List.
Watch This List pick, thank you. I wasn't interested actually in the films themselves to begin with. I actually chose them because I was interested in the subject behind them, which was mental health and sort of psychoanalysis in post-war American cinema. Because at that point in my life, I'd been through already quite a lot of mental health difficulties. At that point, I just thought it was anxiety. Now I know it's a lot more than that. And I was interested in writing about it simply because I didn't know what writing was out there about it, but I wanted to explore. And I knew that Hitchcock had made a film about it because I had a rough outline of Hitchcock's cinema in my head. And so I chose it because it was one of the few films where it was explicitly about doctors and it's explicitly about psychoanalysis. So yeah, that is simply why I chose it at that time.
So are you more interested in it sort of as a like objective observer rather than someone who's like, oh, I love this movie? Like, do you feel kind of clinical in your approach to, okay. So it's not like you sort of admire it from a distance in a way.
Very much so, which I sometimes actually think for academia is more helpful. If you are truly in love with a film, say for me, the two Hitchcocks I admire above all else are The Birds and Marnie. I don't think I could write. I could write in an interesting and novel way about both of them, I could say. But I don't think I could be as academically sharp as I wanted to be. Sometimes you have to have a certain distance from the work in order to actually be the best possible intellectual. Frankly.
You are literally, do you know that right now you are literally like talking the plot of the movie? Because you are Ingrid Bergman saying like, they're like, oh, well, no, you need to fall in love. And she's like, no, I need to be able to be objective and have a level of remove to do my job. And now that is what you're saying about the project.
But I think that's also one of the reasons why, especially the first half, I've watched this twice now in preparation for this to get myself as prepared as possible. And it was 10 years after I'd seen it. And for me, what sticks is still, I think the first half is really actually very, very good. And I like the objectivity element of it. And something that's come up, I think, in discussions between you and I off camera, but also more in my own private life, is the importance of managing sensation, managing emotion and objectivity around it as like a sort of almost a state of perfect control, shall we say. And I think that one of the picks that we didn't go with for this episode, which was The Collector, which I highly recommend. If you've not read Amy's review on it, go and do that. It's a really interesting
And your review, because you're just like you're so particular in how you express that.
Yeah.
And I think it's very good.
Well, thank you. Although I tried to rewatch it yesterday and I found myself with this nagging irritation in the back of my head. And I suppose a psychoanalyst would say that I'm directing it outwards. It was slightly directed at you because I was watching it and going, damn it, she's got a point.
Yes. All right. See you later. This was a great episode. Bye. We're going to just end on a high note.
No,
okay, so tell me how. That's very interesting because that doesn't normally happen, Ethan.
I think this is something, again, we were talking about in the comments of the collector, but just comes up in general, which is that how much of you do you bring to a film?
Mm-hmm.
And I think at that point in my life where I was far, far less in control of my own emotions, far less cognizant of myself, I added a lot of myself to it. And I think I only got about 10 or so minutes in. But then again, the first 10 minutes are him establishing that he's bought the house and he's found the basement. I think in my head, I'd established that. I had erased a lot of that in trying to slightly romanticizing Freddie, I suppose. And then I was like, I don't feel comfortable with this. It felt... So I would like to go back to it at a later stage when I'm not thinking about it for a podcast. And actually, one of the choices that I've got for my watch this list is a film that I would have paired with this had we done it. But I think I like more now I've seen it recently. I saw it last year for the second time, but also works in a similar unsettling vein. But the point of the matter is that returning to this idea of bringing things to a film, I do think that I resonate with the demands of objectivity that Peterson, the Bergman character, places upon herself at the start of the film as a bulwark against emotion. And I think the first half is actually it's a very tender story of these two people. It collapses into like a really weird, soggy mess by the end of it that doesn't work psychoanalytically or narratively, is also worth discussing, even though it drives me up the wall sometimes.
I agree.
With some of the bits. Again, we're on the same page for this.
I rewatched it. So when I watched it the first time, I didn't know what was happening and I didn't know where it was leading. And so it was more like I was paying attention to it as a mystery, like, what is going on? Did he do it? Is she just being, an infatuated mess? But then the second time I knew everything and it wasn't as good, especially the second half. It didn't, the music was kind of abrasive. I like when they go and they visit the doctor. I think that's kind of the saving grace, but it does get into like kind of silliness almost and kind of like parody. And that is, it's kind of obnoxious and that kind of took me out. But the first time I saw it, it didn't hit me that way, but I think it's because I was so engrossed in what is going on that I
apologize for interrupting, but I do think the first half is actually a really good mystery. And to be fair, a psychoanalytic mystery film about a murder is I like that as a complex idea. I think it's a really interesting one. And I think that the first half teases some novel ideas, actually quite gothic ideas, that the film never takes any further and sort of becomes quite diagrammatic about how psychoanalysis can be used. But I think that's something we're going to probably talk about until the cows come home.
Well, and I think that when you said gothic, it reminded me of, so when I know we're not doing The Collector, but one note about that is when I was watching it, I was kind of thinking of Whipping the Body in the way that, but see, in Whipping the Body, the intruder is so much more, what do I want to say? Well, he's not pathetic.
He's not pathetic.
But he's also, I don't know, you feel a sense of security with Freddie. It was like, I don't even want to know what he's going to do. Like, you know what I mean? I'm like repelled almost. Like I want to protect myself against seeing what he's going to do because I feel violated. Whereas Whipping the Body, I don't.
I think something else that comes into it here is something we mentioned in the comments of the collector, and also actually on your Hard Ticket episode with Jeff and Tristan, which again, if you've not listened to, go and give that a listen. It's really good. It's about, you are somebody, I think, who appreciates a male character who is confident in themselves and confident in their desires and does not come at it from a place of weakness or a place of shame for said desire. Where the character of Christopher Lee in The Whip and the Body is an unmitigated bastard all the way through. He is, however, entirely comfortable with that element of himself and is therefore not hesitating on acting on his desires towards Delia Lavi. Whereas Freddie in The Collector, his entire personality is driven by a lack, in this case, a lack of sense of self. He hates himself. And his way of compensating for that is to reify women as these sort of, Miranda in particular, but to be fair, I think it could be any woman, as a beautiful, gorgeous deity who he can possess and worship, more specifically worship. And I think that is especially, whether I'm going too far on this, I don't know, but I think it's fair to say, I think for a woman who would be the object of such a desire, it's probably very repulsive to have this sense of dealing at an unclear level with this sort of person, and you're having to almost pick this person up and fill a hole within them rather than have some sort of equality, even if this equality is violently being whipped in your bedroom by Christopher Lee, which I think some people
would enjoy, right? Well, yes. And I think also it's kind of like Ray Fiennes in Red Dragon. He has that same just kind of like gross, sad, scared, like I felt like Freddie could have eaten her, just like he, what I mean? There's a level of just, I guess I just have this disgust.
Okay, we're going to put a pin in talking about Thomas Harris, and we're going to talk about that near the end of the podcast.
Well, you just read Silence of the Lambs, okay? So this was on my mind.
Yes, I did, and I actually really enjoyed it.
I know, and I mean, those novels are considered like great. I mean, like honestly, seriously,
they're good. They're good pulpy entertainment. They're like really good. I actually find them really easy reading. I find them I can whip through them in I read it in 3 days because it's just so. It's got what I like, as I said in my review of Hannibal, which is like this mixture of bits of like pop psychoanalysis, some horror, some decent characters.
There's procedural stuff.
Procedural, precision, refined elements. It's one of the reasons why you and I think, both like Lecter, is because Lecter is such an interesting, again, objective individual. He is an individual who, for all of his cannibalism, which is a very violent, rabid expulsion of behavior.
There's an insatiability to it.
It is also very clearly and tightly controlled, because in the book, there's the bit in the film where he takes the thing from out of his teeth, and it's the lockpin.
Yeah.
In the book, he's been preparing that for 6 months out of 3 or 4 different pieces of tech that he's been different pieces of garbage he's been putting together. And it's that level of preparation, care, control that I think we resonate with. And I also think for me resonates with why I love Hitchcock, which is an unfashionable but entirely understandable thing to say, considering the ramifications of that control. We should probably get into what's out.
And Ray Milland also has this in Dial M. He is one of my absolute favorite villains. I know you just watched it, that's why it came to mind. But I appreciate that. Is my favorite. I know you love The Birds, but to me, I love watching Ray Milland thinking. I love watching him just stand there and be like, okay, what do I do with this? He's kind of like the Jackal. He's a creative problem solver who knows how to improvise, right? They're having to respond to real things in real time, and they do it so well, and to the point you're rooting for them, and they're bad.
I mean, the other thing about the best scene in Dial M for Murder is the opening sequence, extended sort of what would have been the first act between Swan and Milland, where Milland is explaining everything he's done, and it's been clear that he's done this for nearly 2 years. He's been putting it together. And because again, it's I have thought of every single possibility, and I've
except for one thing, Ethan, one fatal flaw.
Remind me what that was. The key.
The key.
Which again, I also think is a way of articulating something which Hitchcock probably was fighting against all of his life, both personally and professionally, which is that no plan is perfect. No attempt at logical order and objectivity is perfect. The element of chance, the element of human emotion will inevitably slip in and make your entire system collapse around you.
Yeah, there is that's kind of like the whole Coen brother filmography. Like there's so many movies where I feel like the emphasis is, okay, you plan, you perfectly execute it, but then at the 11th hour, somebody walks in and shoots you. I'm thinking of the Jackal. I was so sad. Anyway. Okay, so back to Spellbound. So I think that I see a lot of you in Ingrid Bergman's character, which is why I partly want to do it with you, because I felt like cover this with you, is that I feel like that if you were a psychoanalyst, you would be very similar in temperament and in sort of the way that she goes about it. And then when it's like, oh, but wait, Gregory Peck walks in, like the best looking person you've ever seen in your life, all of a sudden everything comes tumbling down and you're kind of like lost at sea.
Yeah, I think there is something to that. I think there is this, I think there is something to be said for Peterson because Bergman plays Constance Peterson, who is like this very, very well respected psychiatrist. She's very up and coming, and she works at this place called Green Manors, where she sort of works with these
men,
varieties,
a lot of
men actually. It's entirely men, and it's all men who want to put the moves on her, but she has no interest in it in the slightest. And so they resort to slightly childish sort of poking at her, really.
Theatrics. Yeah.
Theatrics. It's like embracing a textbook is, I think, something that one of them.
Yeah, I wrote down that line. Yeah.
Which is a fabulous line for like a guy who has been outwitted by.
It's almost when he kisses her and she just sits there. I thought of Back to the Future, like where it's like it's like kissing my brother. There's like this. There's no eroticism to her at all until Gregory Peck shows up.
Well, this is something which interests me as well. Is that is how that sort of eroticism element is added into the film, which is that there is an argument to be made that Peterson is perfectly fine as she is.
That's true. She doesn't seem unhappy at all or frigid or anything negative.
She's not unhappy. No, she's not. Yeah. The thing is that she is not engaged by the minds around her. I think it's fair to say. She's not engaged.
No one is up to par.
No one is up to par. And so when Peck comes along, and the interesting thing here is I have also been Peck. I have been Bergman. I've also been Peck, to be honest. I have been that level of anxious, uncertain, erotic, dependent on others, not in a sort of a codependent way, you must understand, but in a way wherein my psyche and my sort of sense of stability needs that sort of person to lean on, frankly. But yeah, Peck comes along, and initially we think he's a man called Dr. Edwards, Dr. Anthony Edwards, who is coming to take over the head of Green Manors, who the outgoing head is a gentleman, Dr. Murchison, who's played by the great Leo G. Cavell. And there is this wonderful shot of Peck walking into the dining room and looking at Bergman, and Bergman looking back at him. And there's a little thing that the cameraman, the DIP, whose name I've forgotten, George Lang, I think it was, does, which is that for figures who are clearly hiding something from themselves or lying, he puts light over their eyes. So he does this with Rhonda Fleming, Mary at the start, which is, again, one of my favourite scenes where she's sitting on the couch and talking about how much she hates men. And he also does it during the sequence with Norman Lloyd's character, whose name has just completely escaped me. The young man who thinks that he's killed his father.
Right. I don't know his name, but I know what he looks like. And they have this
Mr.
intense. Oh, okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mr. Garms. And so there is this look, and so he's got this eye look. And now Hitchcock didn't like Lang. He thought that he was a quote unquote woman's cameraman, and because it was Selznick, it doesn't surprise me that Selznick chose to maximize the beauty of his leading lady. However,
and both of them, they're just gorgeous the whole time.
They're both.
I
mean, if you read the reviews on Letterboxd, the top reviews for this, it is just people gushing over both of them, but especially Peck.
I know
a lot of individuals thirsting over Peck, which is understandable because he's got quite a sensitive sort of face to him. But the point is that Bergman very clearly is struck by him visually.
Yes,
and
as one would.
Actually, yeah. To be fair, at that point in his life, as one absolutely would.
My God!
But she cannot reconcile herself to it in that moment, and so in some respects, it is about her lying to herself.
But don't you think the gender inversion is nice? Because you would expect To Catch a Thief, Rear Window, Grace Kelly walks in, and that moment is usually a male where the woman walks in. So I find it very refreshing that it's the other way around, that the gaze is female, because it does feel that way, But I'm thinking of To Catch a Thief, where it's the first time she walks in, you have those moments, but it's not
or Rear Window,
typical that it's a male walking in, and so everyone's like, whoa,
Yeah, So in doing some research for this, I went back to a book about Hitchcock called The Woman Who Knew Too Much, which is by a woman called Tanya Modleski. And it is a psychoanalytic reading of Hitchcock's films from a feminist perspective, actually. And one of the interesting things that she says is Hitchcock's great need to insist on and exert authorial control can be related to the fact that his films are always in danger of being subverted by the females whose power is both fascinating and seemingly limitless. And she also says something which I think is wonderful and I think is very true and relevant to this, which is his work is characterized by a thoroughgoing ambivalence about femininity. And I think that is what you're touching on there, is that you can see that as that sort of reversal as something both exciting and anxiety-inducing, really, both for Peterson in terms of being struck by Gregory Peck's sort of almost saintly beauty. I think it's fair to say it's almost above human, but also this sort of level of the woman actively desiring the man, which is not what happens in traditional Hollywood cinema.
Do you think, though, that do you think that Hitchcock's understanding is more bent toward than how do I ask this? So I can tell in his films, even if you watch Psycho, The Birds, Marnie, you said there is a removal where you feel like Hitchcock is he doesn't know women in a certain way. It's he's afraid of them, but he wants to show their power. Do you think in this instance that it's he can identify better with a woman's desire for a guy in the sense that that's safer to think about? That it would be because when Hitchcock thinks about the male desire for the female, it goes very violent directions, and this was very soft. And you know what I mean? And it's different in tone.
Yes, I actually think that's a very fair reading of that sequence, and I do think that that's very productive, especially considering rewatching Spellbound. Critics call this quite sort of one of the first films where it's really about guilt for Hitchcock. I actually think
the labyrinth of the guilt complex.
The labyrinth of the guilt complex. I actually think it's one of his warmest and most optimistic films. I think it's actually cuddly. I think it's quite a cuddly film for Hitchcock.
It is. It's very romantic and very sweet. Very, very you could fall in love and really believe in someone, and that it's real.
Yeah, and
that things could have a happy ending.
Well, not only that, but two people could work together and deal with issues in a productive and mature way, I think, as well, is a big part of that. And I mean, Hitchcock returns to that in a much more fucked up manner, pardon my language, with Marnie in particular, which is, I think, that this is an inverse of Marnie in a number of ways.
Well, Marnie, see, Sean Connery is just so, like, those two characters, like Dr. Edwards and him are just like opposite ends. But I feel like Hitchcock would more resonate with Connery.
No. I think it was more along the lines that resonate is an interesting word. I would prefer to say he wanted to be.
So it's like a fantasy.
Yes. Hitchcock's cinema is a lot of fantasy, fundamentally. His was a very sort of fantastical cinema constructed entirely from his own authorial perspective, although in Spellbound there's some qualifiers to that, which we'll probably get to.
Right, because it's based on a book.
Well, not only that, but it's Selznick as well. And Selznick was famously very meddlesome when it came to any of his films. He would rewrite scripts on the fly. He would have multiple directors shoot films. He would shoot and shoot and shoot and shoot. He would edit the films often himself. He was famously very hard to work with. And this was the second to last of the films Hitchcock made with him.
What was the last?
The last is a truly dreadful film. I think it's one of my least favorites, called The Paradine Case, which also has
The Paradine Case.
Yeah, which also has Gregory Peck in it. And that is a really dire film. But that was Hitchcock fulfilling a contractual obligation. This is one where he, I think, originally bought the rights to this novel, which is The House of Dr. Edwards, because he knew that Selznick was obsessed with psychoanalysis. And Selznick did a fair few films about psychoanalysis in the mid-40s because he was under analysis at the time. If you notice on the credits, there's a psychiatric...
I wrote that down. It was a woman, May something.
May Rom.
May Rom.
May Rom was his analyst.
Okay, so this is very interesting. Like, whoa. Like, talk about like art and imitating life. So do you even think this is really a Hitchcock movie in terms of, maybe that's why it feels like, as you're talking, I'm like, well, no wonder it doesn't feel like a Hitchcock movie, because it kind of isn't.
It's a compromise, I think. I think this was Hitchcock attempting to play nice with his boss, who was a control freak to the same level, if not more than Hitchcock. And that's hard to believe, but it's true in my mind. And he wanted to do something where he'd be getting in his good favors. He wanted to do something about psychoanalysis. So he bought the rights to the novel, pushed it towards Selznick and went, hey, we could make a film about psychoanalysis. And then Selznick got Selznick about it and did all of his stuff. And it does remind me in places of some of the other wartime melodramas he made, like Since You Went Away, which is very sort of like big, soggy melodramas about women on the home front and psychoanalysis. Right. Well,
this is something Sakana and I talked about. Like, we talked about the 40s and the 50s and how like coming back. Right. So it does seem like it is very contextual in this manner. Like, if you look at movies where there's literally a psychoanalyst in the movie and they say the word psychoanalysis, it's most likely going to be from a certain period, which I think is fascinating. Like, because you could take movies in the, like Tyler and I did, where you're like psychoanalyzing, but that doesn't mean that it's not trying to be that way. No. Whereas this clearly is.
This comes from a really specific point in time, though, which is the end of World
1945. Yeah.
1945. This is a really specific time when it was very clear that America, or the Allies more specifically, had won the war. And it was a case of the Allied side could start looking at rehabilitating a number of the soldiers who had been at war. And so there came about a much greater interest in therapeutic procedures. And that was reflected by, I think it was the War Office in America actually explicitly said to Hollywood, we want you to make films about this. We want you to make films about psychoanalysis and therapy and coming back from the war as a way to I think, ease the public into bringing back brothers, fathers, lovers, husbands who had been very clearly traumatized by what was at the time the most appalling war that had ever happened, I would say.
Yeah. I think it's also interesting to look at. So this is going off again, but I just thought of Green for Danger, which I love.
I still need to see. I have a copy of it. I haven't seen it.
Oh
yet.
my gosh! Oh, you haven't seen it yet? Okay.
No.
Well, it's so good, Ethan. You need to watch it. Well, anyway, the point is that even the tone of something that is set during the war also has this bend where it's almost like the presentation is just people talking.
Yes.
There's just a lot of the movie is about conversation and getting into the personal stuff.
I think that is less to do with any specific bent towards psychoanalysis and maybe more the fact that I don't really know how to phrase it. I think there might be something there about distraction and trying to move away from sort of the stresses of wartime life. I think it might have been just a general introspection that happened, as I think happens a lot in traumatic situations. I think that the last year and a half in particular, no, I would say since late 24 in particular, has been, for a variety of reasons, in a variety of ways, an exceptionally traumatizing time on a micro and macro level for people. And I think that it's led to a lot of introspection.
Inward.
Very inward looking, though I don't think films have caught up with it yet for various reasons. But I do think that when that happens, there is a natural, for me at least, there is a natural desire to reach inward, both as a place of safety and as a place of trying to understand and make sense of things.
Okay, so basically we're all Gregory Peck like stumbling into an office because of something that happened, something bad that happened.
I think on some level, yeah. I think we all oscillate between figures of Peck and Bergman, frankly. I think we all do it I think we do it for ourselves. I think we do it for each other. I think we're all really, I think if we're and this is probably, again, this is very off topic, but I think if we're a good person, like a good person, whatever that is, I think that we are always, we should be constantly aware of the other and others and how we can be of support to them and care for them and be compassionate to them. That doesn't mean we open the doormat to people who would very happily like to see us or our loved ones murdered or they're sent to a camp. But I do mean it in terms of there is a level of understanding that happens. And I think that one of the things I do like about psychoanalysis, because I've been in some form of psychoanalysis, not Freudian, but more Lacanian for a while, is that it allows you to it gives you, I think, the tools to really dig deep, to do that and to fulfill that function and to live a sort of a responsible and thoughtful life. Tyler said that, what was it Tyler said? Freud and Jung discovered
many things.
He did, which was, again, I wrote
many good things.
Yes, an entire 2-page series of notes on the episode, which we still need to go through at some point. But the thing he said was Freud and Jung discovered the basement of the consciousness.
The mind.
The basement of the mind.
That's
I'd like to add to this by saying Lacan showed them they'd been holding the map upside down. And I find what Lacan does really very interesting, but I think we will get to that a little bit later.
Well, what I was going to interject was I wrote down some of so when the film starts, there's this, he quotes Shakespeare, fault is not in our stars, but in ourselves. And then he has this very, I don't know if it's from the book, but the introduction of like psychoanalysis, addressing hidden problems, unlocking doors. The line that really stood out to me was so that the devils of unreason driven from the human soul. So I think that this movie also serves as like an educational way of saying what is psychoanalysis. Like he does a good job of of presenting it in a sort of definitional sense, which I really like.
It's entirely that. And I think this was part of Selznick, I think, was very, very on board with this bringing psychoanalysis to the masses approach that the War Office had specifically requested. Knowing the tone of Selznick's writings, that is a Selznick quote. That is okay. Selznick who absolutely wrote that. I think one of my favorite things anyone ever wrote about Selznick was a memo was sent to him by, I can't remember who it was a writer, and it said in all caps, "The trouble with you, Selznick, is you did all of your reading before you were 12. And so Selznick was a painfully pretentious man, bombastic, self-important, and it's the same sort of tone that you get in that sort of that introductory spiel. But one of the things that comes up a lot in Spellbound are very sort of like clear, I wouldn't say pat explanations, but very sort of like very to the audience explanations.
Yes, which I actually like. I think it works, even though it is pedantic. I know, and I understand what you mean, but I felt like, it's almost like I'm taking a class on psychoanalysis, and they show this film, and it's like almost like his PowerPoint presentation, like even the way that they talk. Even though I think Ingrid Bergman has an excellent way of being very, very sophisticated and refined, but also approachable. She's amazing at that, because I feel like I could go up to her and she would give me a hug, while at the same time she is kind of like otherworldly, like not really fully here. And so she manages to give off that warmth, but also that like she's almost like amused at like the guy who wants to murder his father. She's like, "Oh yes, we just need to go meet with him now." You know what I mean?
Yes. Well, I think I had not considered that, but I think you're right. I think the pleasure of Bergman in this, allegedly she found the script utterly ridiculous, but she sells it.
I'm sure. She does.
She sells it.
She does.
The thing is that what Bergman does is, you're right, she manages to, especially in the first half, deliver a lot of like very jargon heavy dialogue about like guilt complexes and
she talks about like the way that her patients refer to her
yes,
and just there's all this psychobabble is what I would call it.
Psychobabble basically. But she does it in a way which is actually very engaging.
Yes,
and actually really quite sweet. The bit I like the most though is the bit where where Peck and Bergman are on the train, in the train station, and they're off to go and see Brulov, who is her former mentor. And she's like, "Oh yeah, he analyzed me," and she gives like this little explanation of like a psychoanalyst has to be go through psychoanalysis themselves in order to have all their stuff worked out, which is absolutely 200% true. I knew somebody who was training to be a psychoanalyst, and they had to go for 2 to 3 sessions of like 3-hour psychoanalysis a week.
Mm-hmm.
And
Makes
it
sense.
was, by all accounts, absolutely draining, which it would be if you were like spilling your guts for multiple hours a week. So yeah, I think that in many respects, I think she's the perfect way to present psychoanalysis as a doctor to probably a very anxious public back in 45.
And to be someone that you would want to see.
Yes.
I mean, I in like for Hannibal, he actually is kind of, especially in the TV show that I'm watching now, he is the type of doctor where you're like, oh, I wouldn't mind like going to him and sitting in that beautiful office and sort of seeing what he has to say. It's almost like you want to know what they would say, not you. Like you're more interested in their response than what would come out of you.
Well, I think, again, something to be said here in relation to Hannibal, but also Peterson, is, and actually I think just anybody who has made study of the mind, either in themselves or more generally, is that it's so sort of rich and full of insight, nuance, but also a lot of care and precision. Really, for me, there's this level of how do I put it? There's this level of understanding and sort of mastery, which I find, and confidence, I think, in talking about oneself, which I find very, very engaging and appealing, I would say, and which is why I like Lecter, Hopkins Lecter specifically for.
Yeah.
Well, this is the thing. Hopkins Lecter, I could imagine as a psychoanalyst.
Sure.
Whether it comes to, I've not seen the TV show, so I can't comment on Mickle. I've heard this, and Cox I once heard looks like somebody who would genuinely eat people, and that is the best way to describe him, I think.
Do you think in this, once it gets to the second half, that there's a bit of a role reversal here, where it's almost like Ingrid Bergman is the patient, like where it kind of flips on its head, and she is the one that sounds crazy all of a sudden? Because the first half, I feel like she's very sound and reasonable, and then once they go and see her mentor, I feel like there's a complete counselor to client thing happening.
There is that. There is also, I think, something I'm not a big fan of that second half is how it kind of just starts denigrating Peterson. Especially, I like Brulov in some respects, but I also find him really very, when it comes to women and psychoanalysis, I find it really hard to watch, because I find it very women are silly.
Condescending.
Very condescending. Women are silly. They are all irrational. They're
yeah, but he has a point in this particular instance.
Well,
she's totally infatuation city.
It's not because, though, she is a woman. That's the important.
That's true. Okay.
To stress. And that's the thing I would stress here, is that he is saying that it's specifically a disorder of the female mind, that they are neurotic, silly, in love, which again, I think male and female minds, that whole sort of trying to gender things is a bunch of hooey anyway, to quote Gregory Peck in this. And this is part of the example of it, because it's usually about dividing things and not acknowledging that there are really, it's less to do with psyche, gender, biochemistry, and it's more to do with simple human responses to stimuli, which in this case is, sorry, I can tell I'm interrupting you, which in this case is a woman who's probably not been in love before.
I was about to say, it's a childlike, I think what he's critiquing is not female, it's that she has never been in love before. It literally is like immaturity, inexperience, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed thing that normally happens when you're younger. And when it manifests in an older, she's not old, but you know what I mean, in an adult, it comes across as silly, but it actually is just a reflection of her lack of experience.
Yes, I think you're right there. I just wish he didn't say, yes, it's all the females, because he starts to sound, within 45, I can understand why they might have done that, because to say it was a different time is a mild understatement. It was 81 years ago. No, yes, 81 years ago. But
good math there.
Thank you. But what the bigger problem is that he's a terribly arrogant man, Brulov, even though he is a very smart man. And because of that, he makes this ridiculous statement. There's the bit where he and Peck are sitting on the sofa, and he's talking about Freud and dream stuff is a lot of hooey. And he goes, oh, you've got a guilt complex and you've got amnesia and you don't know where you're coming or going. But Freud was hooey. This you know. And it's that sort of condescension and this sort of frustration. Arrogance. When you realize that what he's actually doing is that he is simply projecting his own frustrations onto this man, when in reality he is simply also abiding by a series of tenets that he considers to be, at the end of it, he considers to be useful and productive in clearing whatever angst or anxiety may have happened. I mean, hundreds of years ago, it might have been, and I'm not saying this in any derogatory way, I mean this sincerely, prayer. I've seen I've read a book recently where it's talking about how a therapist and a priest have a great similarity in sort of their roles. But the point is that Brulov has this sort of very condescending attitude towards Constance. Even when I think he loves her, I do think he loves her and lots of like her, but it's a fatherly condescension way.
Yes, but it's also a protective way because he's like, you don't think I knew that this guy was like trouble the moment he walked in, as soon as you said his name, and then when they're dissecting the dream, when we finally get to the Salvador Dali, like beautiful sequence, that to me is just, it's probably the best representation of that, right? I mean, it's kind of Dr. Caligari-ish in the way that it looks.
I love it, and I have problems with it. I love how it is made. Because when I did my dissertation, I actually researched how it was made and everything around it. So if you wish, I can give you a potted history of how that all happened. But I don't like how it's used to solve the narrative. I'm not a fan of that in the slightest.
How come? Why?
Right. First, I think we actually need to give some plot points here because this is important for the general thing.
We're assuming everyone's seen it, but go ahead. Yes.
Okay.
They probably haven't.
So we've jumped ahead quite a bit, but here's some very brief outlines. What it turns out is that Peck is not Edwards. Peck is somebody who thinks he's Edwards, and he has a couple of very specific phobias, distinctly black lines against a white background. As the film goes on, it becomes increasingly clear that he suffers very badly from amnesia, and he may or may not have killed Murchison, not Murchison, Edwards.
Right, the real Edwards.
And then we go to see this dream with Brulov. And what it turns out is, and it's a bit complicated because I don't think it's very well articulated, but it is, he is a doctor called John Ballantyne. He was a bomber pilot in the Second World War. He was bailed out in over Rome. He suffered third-degree burns on his hand, and he was taken in for combat shock as well, where he was treated by Dr. Edwards. While having lunch with Dr. Edwards, Dr. Murchison, who is the head of the asylum, accosts him very angrily and says, "This is my place. Don't steal this place I work in." Edwards dismisses him. But Murchison follows Edwards and Ballantyne to a ski resort and shoots him in the back.
Right.
Which Peck witnesses.
Right.
But here is where the guilt complex thing comes in. And I've had to watch this 3 times and take notes and research the guilt complex in order to reconstruct the plot. That's how muddy it is.
Jeez.
Yeah, it's not great. It is Peck's character, at a young age, accidentally killed his brother by tipping him over onto some iron railings.
Yes.
And the white background of his shirt and the black of the iron railings crossed together. It becomes this sort of psychosis, this sort of image of horror.
Trigger.
It becomes a trigger.
PTSD. Yeah.
Yes. And it's something that he suppresses deep within himself, according to the guilt, the guilt hypothesis. When he sees Edwards being shot, a black figure against a white background, he becomes psychotic, effectively. He loses his memory. He loses his identity. He assumes the role of Edwards and carries on to Green Manors and takes up the position. But Murchison knows that this is not the case.
Of course, because he did it.
Because he did it.
Right.
And so the end,
and he was there.
And what the dream is a coded explanation, very explicitly coded explanation of what happened, which is Murchison accosts Edwards at the 21 Club with Gregory Peck's character in tow and threatens him. And then he sees Edwards being shot and going over the edge of a cliff. And then all of this happens. Well, he doesn't see Edwards being shot. He sees Edwards simply fall off the cliff, and then he sees somebody drop the gun and doesn't realise that it's Murchison. It is, as you can tell, phenomenally complicated, and the film
and
is
convoluted also.
ridiculously convoluted, and it's not great at explaining this.
But the visuals, Ethan, the dolly nature of it, the scissors, the eyes,
it's beautiful. It was beautifully done, and some of that is directed by Hitchcock. Some of that is directed second unit by a gentleman called William Cameron Menzies, who did a lot of the set design and art direction for Gone with the Wind. And basically, if there was a production designer in Hollywood, it was Menzies. He was the most incredible of them all, and he also made Things to Come. But, so there's all these wonderful images. However, you mentioned the images. I'm going to read you a really long quote now. I'm very sorry.
Oh, great.
But it's genuinely really important to talking about Hitchcock.
This is like, you just made me think of the SpongeBob, like one eternity later, like that we need to like put that logo up 3 hours later. All right. I don't know what you mean by really long.
Okay. So this is from the director, Jean-Luc Godard, who was a massive fan of Hitchcock. And he wrote and he did a really interesting part of his Histoire du Cinéma about Hitchcock, which he could.
Are you going to read this in French?
I wish I could. I wish I could. He has a wonderfully gravelly voice, but no. This is Godard. We forget why Joan Fontaine leans over the cliff. Why was Joel McCrea in Holland? What confession did Montgomery Clift keep secret? Why did Janet Leigh stop at the motel? Why does Teresa Wright still love Uncle Charlie? What is Henry Fonda entirely guilty of? Why did the American government... still need to see that. Why did the American government hire Ingrid Bergman? But we remember a handbag. We remember a bus in the desert. We remember a glass of milk, a windmill, a hairbrush. We remember a row of bottles, a pair of glasses, a musical score, a keychain, because with them and through them, Hitchcock succeeded where Alexander, Caesar, Hitler, and Napoleon failed in taking control of the universe. Maybe 10,000 people haven't forgot Suzanne's apple, but 1 billion remembered the lighter in Strangers on a Train.
Wow.
That is, I think, one of my favorite quotes on a filmmaker.
It's fantastic. It's like it's written by like Hitchcock's number one fan. It's so
that would be
gravitas infusing.
I mean, Godard's writing on Hitchcock is incredibly dense, even for a film graduate. It's some of I think some of the Cahiers stuff from the 50s and 60s is some of the hardest stuff to read if you're not into that very specific rhythm and style. And this is from the 80s and 90s where Godard is like right at his most, he's getting towards his most like gnomic and very, very detailed. Like you saw my writing on Dial M for Murder. It surpasses that considerably in terms of complexity. But the point is, Godard knew Hitchcock's films like the back of his hand. He knew them and loved them. And he knew them and loved them because the images, as you said, are what matters. And Hitchcock knew,
and that's what stays.
And that's what stays. Hitchcock knew the importance of making an image. And Hitchcock knew the importance of that ultimately a film is not a constructed narrative. It is a series of images strung together by a series of coincidences. Remember, Hitchcock also said, cinema is life, but with the boring bits cut out.
Yes. It's a very Sam Fuller mantra, because that was his also. And
it would not surprise you that Godard was a massive Sam Fuller fan. And
oh my gosh, so am I.
And had Fuller in one of his films.
Fuller did not say it quite as delicately as like it's about life with the boring bits cut off. He said that if he doesn't turn you on in the first 60 seconds, turn it off.
Yeah.
So it's the same principle though, where it's just like so punchy. I don't find Spellbound to be quite in this level, but that's perhaps because of what you said about Selznick.
I think it is, frankly, because of Selznick. I just want to check something as well, because Samuel Fuller has a quote in he appears in one of Godard's films, actually.
I love Fuller movies. They're just so intense, and it does feel that way, like lean. You know, there's nothing extra in there that you don't need. It's constant, like reactionary, and there's a pleasure in just like not having to deal with any extraneous. In Pierre Le Fou, which is one of the best films,
Belmondo asks Fuller's character, "What exactly is the cinema?" To which Fuller replies, "A film is like a battleground. It's love, hate, action, violence, death. In one word, emotions."
Yeah, there we go. Okay.
And I think Hitchcock also was aware of this. Again, Hitchcock is an artist who I think who strives between this tension between objective and subjective almost all the time. He is somebody who's working from a very subjective perspective in point of view shots, in his way of understanding the world. It's highly detailed towards his understanding of psyche, which is very limited, frankly. But it's also done in this way where it's very controlled and it's trying to eliminate any sort of chance from the structure, from the form.
So for him, so you would call, I mean, if somebody tried to like disregard auteur theory, disregard, you would say for this, it's absolutely impossible. Like certain I mean, I watch movies with the director in mind always. And that's kind of my interest. I think that's a very cinephile thing to do though.
Yeah.
So this is not unique, but I think in this, it's almost like you really lose so much not looking for the directorial influence specifically and sort of unpacking it in that way or contextualizing it is a loss.
Hitchcock put so much of himself into his films, but not only that, he made himself very much part of his films. And that's not just by
cameos.
By the cameos, which there is not one here for Spellbound, I think.
Right.
No, there is. He is in the sequence at the hotel.
I didn't see him, but
I vaguely remember he's there. I cannot remember what he's doing there. So it's not just that, but also by sitting down to interviews. I mean, Godard's one-time friend and companion at the Cahiers du Cinéma, François Truffaut, made a comprehensive book called Hitchcock Truffaut, which is entirely interviews with Hitchcock by Truffaut on everything, on every film he ever made. And
this is like the director's dream. Like this, I feel like this episode is like, this is like, I could imagine like PTA and all these guys just like sitting around wanting to talk about these things. Or like Bong just interviewed David Fincher about Zodiac. And it's like, and you could just watch it and it's so fascinating. Yeah. I just watched Bad Day at Black Rock with Sturgis's.
I was going to say the Sturgis commentary.
The Sturgis commentary. And it's so, I mean, really, this kind of thing is just, it is so, what's the word? Like it supports the film so much.
It
beyond its own capacity.
Yes. One of the things you were discussing with Mark, for context, ladies and gentlemen, this is recorded the day after Repulsion came out, the episode. One of the things that's to be noted here is that you and Mark are talking about where the problems of the modern film and where modern films might be more morally censorious. Shall I put it that way? I think the issue is that, but I think it's part of a wider issue, which is that auteur theory has become a commodity. And like Spellbound, which is a film which is interested in defining a single message out of a series of convoluted images. In the dream, the images have one meaning and one meaning only, and those are universal images and universal meanings, which frankly is a little too much Camille Paglia for my liking, but that's a different story. I could tell.
I know, no, go on. The problem is there's so many rabbit trails that I think.
There are so many
rabbit
trails. Yeah. But the thing is that there's so much in the way of trying to have a single message and a single issue that people debate out into the world. And the text becomes a text in itself, which is supported by a series of interpretations made by pressmen, interviews by stars, interviews by directors, so on and so forth. And then that becomes a package which you then consume. And that's it. Auteurism has become consumable, wherein the classic form of auteurism was effectively taking films that were not really meant to be discussed or were discussed just in a specific way and reevaluating them and reappraising them, but to the lights of very specific thinkers. Please note, for example, that in the Godard quote I cited, he talks about Cézanne. Now, Godard's thing was to bring in literature, art, and philosophy, music. Mm-hmm. He was an incredibly well-read
Renaissance man.
Very much a Renaissance man, incredibly insightful. And he was able to create these incredibly strong and thoughtful interconnections of ideas because in his criticism, because of that. And that was what made his criticism work. What's happened is that it's become arguably a lot more banal.
But it is. Don't you think that's also to do with who's directing now? I mean, I hate to be like a boomer here, but I do think times have changed in terms of like the quality of people don't take as much time as these great directors we're talking about, and there's so much more distraction. There's so much more like the monetary industry part of it is such a factor now. The culture is such a factor. There's so many influences that I don't feel like were present for these great artists.
I think I can understand where you're coming from. I think there is a danger of romanticizing the classical Hollywood era too much because
but I'm going to do it anyway.
We'll do it anyway. It is an era of cinema which was based around primarily five or six different companies that operated as businesses that employed a set number of staff on a set number of films and would rotate and would follow trends and would adapt famous pieces of literature, would present it, would promote stars. A number of the directors who came to be the real first vanguard of auteurs, bar Hitchcock. Hitchcock is a notable exception. He comes from the British film industry, which is a lot smaller. But the Americans, I'm thinking Ford in particular, but also Hawks, Preminger, actually.
I was going to say Otto
Preminger. They were, especially Ford and Hawks, were gentlemen who did not have any interest in talking about art, who were very sort of natural, undiluted. Should I say undiluted?
It's meat and potatoes. It's like just yeah.
They were doing a job. But they were also doing a job through a very clear industry. And it was an industry that was regulated. It had a censorship body in place. It had ratings. It had
structure is what you're saying.
It had an immense amount of structure.
Okay.
And some of the structures have disappeared in the modern day, but there are new structures in place. The system is still, I think, the system is largely the same. In fact, I would, if I'm honest, argue that were some of the advantages, technological advantages of today available in the 40s, Selznick and co would have taken them, and I because they were businessmen first and foremost. Some had pretensions of art, like Selznick, like Zanuck, for example.
Where would you put Wells in all this? I just have to ask because
good question.
Yeah, because we haven't mentioned him, and it seems like if we're talking about this, we have to at least.
Well, Wells was one of the original auteurs.
Yes.
Lionized. He went to France and he did very well out of it. Actually, I'd say of all the directors, he did the best out of it in terms of France. He was a rebel. He was very much an anachronism and an iconoclast. Well, not an anachronism. He was completely obsessed
ahead of his time. Yeah.
Well, he looked forward and looked backwards. But the point is that he was somebody who worked entirely in his own way, on his own things and his own interests. And that got him into trouble with the studios a lot. The reason why Magnificent Ambersons is half the film it is because he buggered off halfway through to go and make a film in Brazil. And nobody knew what to do with the film, so they made a completely new ending and popped it onto the end of Magnificent Ambersons. Citizen Kane barely got made. He made
Touch of Evil is what I just watched Touch of Evil recently, and that feels that is another one where it's like if you disregard the director, you don't know anything. It's not nearly as potent.
I mean, that's a text where the film famously was released in one specific way, and it was an absolute bomb. Apart from going to France, where weirdly it won prizes, but it was not the version that Wells wanted. And Wells wrote a 50-page memo about how it should be re-edited. And the version I think you probably saw was the version that was re-edited in the late 90s.
That's right. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I don't actually know where you can find an original copy of Touch of Evil, like the one you would have seen in 58. I would like to see it just for reference's sake. But he was somebody who ran afoul of the studios constantly, not just because the studios were suppressing him, mind. There's perhaps a little bit too much of the Orson Welles reverence. He was also somebody who was very hard to deal with and quite unpleasant and rude. And
obviously, I mean, these guys, I'm like, what do you seriously expect? Like, we were just talking about Laurence Olivier, and he was kind of a jerk. And it's like, I don't know what we expect from these people. I mean, there's only a certain level that can be faked. I mean, a lot of this comes from the fact that they are certain ways. Now, Ethan, before we get to your 3 picks, I want to talk about, this is something I just am curious about. The way that I see Spellbound as being different from the rest of his filmography is in the love. And I think that the fact that her name is Constance, even though it's kind of cheesy, do you consider it to be like Hitchcock's purest? Like, just, she is so constant. I mean, she's so unwavered, and I don't even know what to compare her to. So I had to ask you that.
Yes, I think this is probably
his sweetest.
I think there are 2 in my mind from the 40. I've seen 40 Hitchcock films now. I've got 11 more to see, so I can make a fairly good statement, not about the whole of his filmography, but a fair proportion of it. A lot of Hitchcock's films, especially in the 50s and 60s, are about like people who can't relate, people who can't connect, who are basically can't fall in love because they're so.
Or there's double identities, like you don't even know, you think you're in love and you don't know what's going on. Rebecca, suspicion.
I think the 2, and ironically, one of them is one of the far later ones. I think the 2 that seem to be the most optimistic or the sunniest are Spellbound and Torn Curtain.
And The Trouble with Harry is also very.
Well, yes, Trouble with Harry. I like Trouble with Harry, actually.
I do too. I like it a lot.
I think that's a really sweet one. I think those 3 for me are the ones where it feels the most optimistic about love. And I think that some of the ones like Rear Window in particular.
And Vertigo.
And Vertigo. But I think actually more Rear Window than Vertigo is actually very cynical and very dark.
I know, and he's so mean in that movie.
He's incredibly.
I can barely watch it.
I mean, it's a film about a guy who fundamentally does not believe he is worthy of Grace Kelly's affection, and so what he decides to do is push her away at every opportunity and belittle her. And he does it subconsciously because he can't bring himself to believe it. It is unfortunately, I think, one of the things which I find compelling about Hitchcock's more sort of sad and dark films, Marnie, to some extent.
Frenzy.
No, not Frenzy, because I'm thinking at a very specific angle here.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, I think Marnie is one of them. I think Rear Window is another. I think Vertigo, to some extent, is this level of what we were talking about right at the start with Freddie, is this level of a masculine self-loathing and a masculine inadequacy that is both deeply repressed and deeply buried under the text, but also incredibly obvious. And I think that came through I think that was Hitchcock, because Hitchcock was let's be honest, Hitchcock was a really awful human being. He was incredibly abusive to Hedren, and she has said as much multiple times over. He was famous for very cruel practical jokes. He belittled his actresses.
Polanski is what this sounds like.
Yes, frankly. I think it's a similar, and unfortunately, here we have to talk about it because it's integral to the plots of the films. Some would say that about Polanski. I've not seen enough of his work to comment.
Well, and I know that for some actresses he was very, very kind, but in general he would like yell and he would try to provoke people and get something out of them.
And Hitchcock's obsession became later in life, I would say, from about Vera Miles and The Wrong Man onwards, was taking a woman and basically making her into his puppet and turning him into the version of himself he wanted. Of himself, actually, I think that's perfect. He wanted an extension of his will as a woman. He did not, because he was scared. and he didn't feel comfortable with sex. He didn't feel comfortable with intimacy. That's why all of his films are about thwarted intimacies. This is one of the few where it kind of works out. And it only happens when Dr. Murchison, who is the father figure, which Slavoj Žižek, the great Slovakian sort of psychoanalyst and writer, he wrote a book called Everything You Wanted to Know About Lacan, but were afraid to ask Hitchcock. Notes that all these 40s films have this most of the 40s films have this figure in where it's like this dad character who has to be knocked off in order for the couple in the center to become sort of unified. And the other great example is Herbert Marshall in Foreign Correspondent, who plays the traitorous diplomat father who dies at the end, so Joel McCrea and Lorraine Day can have a relationship. So I think that this is it. Definitely, I think this is one of the more optimistic variations on that. It's probably his sunniest film in that respect for all of its guilt. But yeah, I think partly it probably falls down as well because it is sunnier, and it isn't, and it feels, for all of its talks of guilt, it doesn't feel like a film about guilt.
Especially because of the score. The music just takes you out. It's too much.
The Roger score is very odd. It won the Academy Award, though. Surprising.
I'm shocked.
I'm
very big on score. When a score is way too interruptive, like I'm not talking about like Hans Zimmer. Like I don't mean it can't be majestic or, foreboding, but I don't like when it's interrupting the emotionality that you might be feeling and trying to redirect it to something else. That's very obnoxious.
Hated the collector's score.
I did.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm very oral.
No, yes.
Like, yeah.
Yeah, Orville. Yes, absolutely. I think as well it is probably because it isn't as sunny. I think it's sunny, but it denies what I think Hitchcock was always feeling, which is that intimacy and relationships are inherently very scary and full of not just compromise, but the loss of self in a way that's actually very painful for him. And he fought against for the rest of his life. Personally and also artistically. So I think that it is sunny, but with qualifications.
Now we're going to move into your 3, Ethan.
Yeah. Yes.
What are your watch this list? What is your watch this list?
Okay. I am going to start. I'm going to leave the one you've seen for last, although I think you might have accidentally picked up on it already during this conversation. So the first one is Love Letters. Now, this is from 1945.
Oh, yeah. I just saw you log that. Okay.
So this is from 1945. This stars Jennifer Jones, who would become, interestingly, Selznick's wife. And in fact, I think she is explicitly, with the opening credits say, with permission of David O. Selznick. That's why Cotton and Jones are working there. And it is based on a novel. The premise is a soldier who's played by Cotton writes love letters for his comrade who is wooing a woman back in Britain in a very Cyrano de Bergerac style. Okay. The gentleman goes home because he is going to be retrained. He meets and marries this woman. And then Joe Cotton suffers an injury and also has to be brought home. And inquiring about his friend, it turns out that he is murdered. But to be fair, this person that Cotton has been writing the letters to, he's never seen her before. And then he meets at a party a young woman called Singleton, just Singleton.
Okay, yeah. I see where this is going.
Things start to develop, and I won't give away what happens. But
don't give it away. This sounds very intriguing.
It is intriguing. It is completely nuts. It is another amnesiac novel. It's another amnesiac narrative, but an inversion. Here, it's the woman who's the amnesiac. So I won't give any more away from that.
Okay, so pin that. Okay, Love Letters. I got it.
Love Letters. It is written, the reason I also watched it is because the screenplay is by Ayn Rand, who is...
The Fountainhead.
Yes, which is... I am eternally fascinated by Rand because I think she is an example of somebody like Hitchcock who was obsessed with objectivity, who would literally thesis was objectivity, and who
Yes.
ultimately was one of the most profoundly emotional people of the 20th century. I also actually think she was on the spectrum, and I think that her writing style and her philosophies represent an incredibly highly masking neurodivergent person attempting to make sense of a world that she doesn't even understand. And the writing of the Fountainhead is pure neurodivergent literature, and love within this story and love within love letters is a very highly, it's all head based, it's all spiritual. Like Cotton beautifully describes, it's one of the strangest sentences, it's one of the most beautiful sentences, describes this woman he's writing letters to as a pin-up girl of the soul, which might be one of the wildest lines I've ever heard in a film. But it's fantastic. And it's about trying to control these emotions in a way where they're so overwhelming you can't deal with them. So it has it's a very dense film, and it's pretty turgid in places, but I found myself endlessly fascinated by it, and my review is about 20 years long because I was just trying to get out all of these
Ethan,
thoughts.
this is your best pitch I've ever heard in my life. I'm gonna watch this movie today. This is
if you
great.
enjoy it, I hope it's a case that my language in describing it meets your language in hearing it, is what I will say on that front.
Okay, what's your number 2?
The number 2 is the other film I did for my dissertation, which was Let There Be Light, which is an hour-long documentary. You can find it on Canopy, although it's on YouTube. It's in the public domain these days. And it was part of the war effort to... basically, they were shown in cinemas before features or double features. And the Know Your Enemy series and the Why We Fight series are part of that. About 4 or 5 different directors went into service during World War II. Mark Harris's book 5 Came Back is about them, and one of them was John Huston, who suffered from...
I love.
Yeah. Yes, and you did a really good episode with Jacob about Huston a couple of years ago. I think it was the first Provocateur.
It was.
And it was... So he suffered from, I think, some sort of... They call it combat fatigue. We call it PTSD today. And he recovered from it, and he was so inspired that he wanted to make a documentary about it. And so what it is a series. It's a process of curing in heavy air quotes, patients who were suffering from combat fatigue during World War II. And we have people who stutter quite severely. We have people there's one person who simply cannot remember his name in a very John Ballantyne move. We have somebody who can't physically move his legs. And it's about the ways in which the US Army were bringing people back to normality, effectively. Now, the film was banned. It never saw the light of day until about the early 80s. Now, there are differing reasons why. The War Office said it was because Huston didn't do all the ethics properly in terms of permission slips and paperwork for
confidentiality and stuff.
Yes, because you're seeing people who are very vulnerable here. I mean, there is one guy who, bless him, is so overwhelmed by the idea of a photo of his sweetheart that he gets overseas. He bursts into tears and has to leave the room. It's really very emotional stuff. That's probably the most emotional bit of the film. And you've got all these really quite sad pieces of footage, and you're not quite sure how conscious they are of it, because whenever you do an ethics review of anything, if you're including subjects, they have to be cognizant of what they're doing and what they're signing
Informed
up for.
Consent.
Informed consent, absolutely.
That's right.
But there doesn't seem to be much of that here. The other thing is that Huston believed it was because it destroyed the warrior myth. It destroyed the idea that people were coming back from the war and they would be safe and sound. I think it's a mixture of both. And I also think because it outlines that American society was not as secure and as stable as the War Office and the government wanted to think. There were inequalities, there were racial inequalities, there were economic inequalities. It was a very stressful... America was not the wonderful homeland that people... that they wanted
that we have today. Is that what you're
that we have? Well, yeah. I mean, this is the thing.
I know what you mean, though.
Yes, but then again, all countries on some level have this sort of need to mythologize themselves in order to keep.
Yes, in order to keep going.
But America has done it perhaps the most notably and the loudest, largely because of the way that media was consumed and produced in America. I mean, America was the film factory from the 30s onwards.
Right.
So it's 50 minutes. It's one to watch if you're interested in that era, or what treatment might have looked like, and how we've changed and how we've developed as a society, I would argue.
Excellent pitch also.
Thank you.
Okay, and the last one I have seen.
Yes. What do you think it is based on the context clues I've been giving you?
I was kind of thinking that it might be another Hitchcock movie, but you already kind of talked about them so much.
No.
Is it a movie I like or dislike?
You gave it 3.5 stars.
Okay, there's no way I will know what this is.
Go for it. Let's put it this way. You already named another adaptation of the novel it's based on.
Oh my gosh, Ethan.
It's Manhunter.
Oh, wow. I love that movie.
Manhunter.
No. 3.5 is not accurate. I think Manhunter. I did that in 2018. That's an old rating.
You mentioned Red Dragon, and I was like, oh, for goodness sake. The game is up. But no.
Yeah.
It's Michael Mann's Manhunter. And the reason I say Manhunter is because it's a film about... It is a love story at its heart. It's a love story about a serial killer. Well, no, the behavioral agent tracking a serial killer.
Mm-hmm.
It is about understanding the crevices and dark recesses of the human mind. It is about perfect control. It is about the obsessive need for control, both in Will Graham and Dolarhyde, actually. And then there's also the fact that Michael Mann's cinematic form is so controlled and so precise.
Yes. And it's so beautiful. I need to rewatch it. That's been on my list forever.
I think the first half of that film is maybe top 20 of all time for me. I think it's one of the most remarkable things ever made, is that first half. When Dolarhyde comes in, it moves in a direction that I'm a little reluctant to go in because I've enjoyed everything that's come with. I find Graham eternally fascinating as a figure.
Me too. I love, Will Graham as character, no matter who's playing him.
Because when Peterson plays him, I mean, he's superb when Peterson plays him.
I love Peterson.
It's very, very good.
To Live and Die in LA.
Yes, another excellent film. But the thing for me is that there is this level of the thing about Graham is that he suffers from a medical condition that gives him an excess of empathy. In fact, I believe I don't remember if it's in Manhunter. I think it's in the Fuller series, but it's definitely in the book, which I actually read. And so what we get is a figure who is, I suppose, cursed by his own neurology, which is, again, a subject which I'm quite emotional about, frankly, who is forced to utilize it to stop this sort of very disturbed individual from making a rampage. And he's also got to face up with Hannibal Lecter, who is played by Brian Cox in a really chilling performance. It's not... If Hopkins is like pageantry and carnivalesque, this is very sadistic and sincere.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that is, I think, my final recommendation is consider Manhunter in the light of Spellbound as two films about neuroses, murder, and love. And
also kind of like, you just reminded me of Father Karras. How in The Exorcist, how characters kind of sacrifice themselves and are so drained of their sort of power or gift for the betterment or for the salvation of someone else, or for, you know what I mean? That is very appealing to me, that whole...
I think sacrifice is an appealing... I think sacrifice is an appealing subject, irregardless of whether you are thinking about it within religious contexts, Christ
or horror or
horror,
right,
or within war. I think there is, for me at least, I find sacrifice a subject of sort of great interest. It also has, obviously, sacrifice can have a certain narcissistic bent to it, which I also find very, very interesting, in terms of putting basically putting oneself out there for another when not explicitly requested. And how much does that become about the sacrifice?
Codependency.
Yeah, in some level, yeah. How much does that become about the sacrifice and not the sacrifice?
Right.
So there's a number of different things, but I saw Manhunter again last year and was blown away by it. And I would not deny that there is not a month goes by where I don't think about Manhunter in some way, shape, or form. I cannot explain why, but there is something about it which stays with me quite profoundly.
I have congratulations, Ethan. Like, your pitches were superb.
Oh,
I really feel
very kind.
I really am like, wow. Like, not only do they relate, but I actually want to go out and see them right away, which is the whole point. I mean, the whole point of my podcast is really that we're trying to say, like, watch this.
Well, the thing is when
check it out.
When you put this idea to me, and I think it would have been about, when did you see The Locket? It must have been about March.
Oh my gosh, this is months ago.
Early March, and I knew you wanted to do Spellbound, and I began thinking about very clearly what films would go with it. And so what it was a month and a half's worth of just sort of gently sifting through material, thinking about it carefully, reflecting on it, and then sort of coming to the conclusions that we've got today. So, yeah, again, it's that level of precision, I would argue. And
preparation. Yeah.
I appreciate it for a long time.
Yes, I appreciate it very much. And I think that these will, it's not just that I need to rewatch Manhunter. And I actually wanted to do Michael Mann when I was doing Provoc, because it would have forced me to do his entire filmography. And I love so many of his films.
Yes.
But there are still, like, there were times in my life where I saw them at where I didn't know what they were. Manhunter is one of them. Thief is another.
Yes.
There was another. I saw some of Black Hat, and that was just. They need to be. That's a time thing.
Thief is one. Thief I originally put above Manhunter because, again, it's a film about perfect coordination and perfect timing, and again, being not objective but being isolated and being closed off, which is a subject I think the loneliness of that is something I relate to very strongly.
And that's Heat. That's Heat. Collateral.
Heat, and strangely, Heat has never. I've seen Heat, but it's not one I want to go back to immediately. Whereas,
Ethan, you're going to be fired by everyone in the world.
I know, but Manhunter keeps coming back to me in ways, and I can't explain why. And I think it's one that's going to probably be with me for a long, long time. Even with some of the things I'm not as big a fan of, there is just something about it which works so incredibly well.
Well, thank you for this. I hope that everyone's edified by our conversation. I think this was very rich. I'm glad that we did it. I'm glad that we chose this, not just because of the film itself, but because it's by Hitchcock, which just opened the avenue to be able to talk about something that you are so knowledgeable on, and the time and everything. So you were the perfect person to do this with, Ethan. And
thank you for having me.
I hope.
Pleasure.
Of course, anytime. So everybody check out these movies, and we'll see you at the movies.